You cannot have innovation or progress without failure. It doesn't exist. And if you truly aren't failing as you're trying to innovate, then you're probably not pushing very hard because you haven't broken anything. You're making very, very safe choices. We could never have put a person on the moon without a bunch of rockets blowing up first. Like, I met a CFO once. I asked him the priorities of the company, and he said, efficiency and innovation. And I laughed and said, well, good luck with that. Innovation is inherently inefficient because it requires experimentation. And experimentation requires failure. Much is said about fail fast. I actually don't like the term failure. The problem with the word failure is it's like the word cancer. It's too broad. Like, if you have stage 4 liver cancer or you have a mild melanoma, those things are both called cancer, but they are clearly not the same thing. And the same thing is when we hear the word failure. Some people think failure means experimentation, but a lot of people think failure means catastrophe. And so when we tell our company, failure is good, fail fast, that literally scares people. We don't want to fail. So I think we need a new word. We want to avoid failure. Failure is catastrophic and it should be avoided. But falling, I think we should encourage. When a kid falls off a bicycle, we didn't tell them they failed. We tell them they fell. And what do we tell them? Get back up and try again. So I don't want to tell people they fail. I want to see people they fell. And I want to encourage them to try again and brush off their knees. So I think we should fall and fall often. And I will judge the quality of innovation not necessarily by if you fell, but how quickly you can pick yourself back up and try again.
Need motivation?
Watch a top 10 Would Believe Nation.
Hey, it's Carmichael, and I make these videos because you are probably the most ambitious person in your circle, but you know you're capable of more, and you get that push by surrounding yourself with the best. So today, let's learn from one of the best, Simon Sinek, and my take on his top 10 rules of success. Enjoy. Rule number 2, seek fulfillment.
Let's reinforce that point because I think it's an important one, that fulfillment is a right and not a privilege. And when we go out with our friends for dinner, or when we used to be able to do that, you sit around and somebody says, I love my job, and everybody goes, oh my God, you're so lucky, like they won something. That statement should be the norm, not the exception. We should all get to go to dinner and say, I love my job, and it's the one person who says, I don't, that we can intervene. So yeah, I believe it is a right, and we have a responsibility ourselves to find a place where we want to work with the people that we would work with rather than just taking the biggest salary. That we have a responsibility to take care of the people around us, and we have a responsibility to speak up and ask our leaders to work with us and create a place where people want to come to work, where there's a safe space for us to take care of each other and feel taken care of. So there's mutual responsibility all around. So when you say, how do we do it? Well, it requires constant work. It's like, how do you stay healthy? Well, I can give you a whole list of things you have to do. You have to eat right. You have to nurse your personal relationships. You have to get enough sleep. You have to exercise. You have to meditate. You have to be mindful. There's like 30 things. And you can't do all those things well all the time. It's a striving. And when one's doing well, sometimes one thing falls off. It's a striving, and it's the same. The pursuit of fulfillment is a striving. I think it's, this is why I make the distinction between fulfillment and happiness. To seek happiness is a lot easier because happiness is fleeting. You get a new job, you're happy. You get a raise, you're happy. You win a new piece of business, you're happy. You're given a gift, you're happy. Somebody says something nice to you, you're happy. And that feeling goes away. Nobody walks around with a sense of happiness for a job they got 4 years ago. It's gone. Where fulfillment is different. Fulfillment, you can feel fulfilled by your work even if you're not enjoying it today. You can feel fulfilled by your work even if you're having a bad day, or one of your colleagues is grumpy. You can still be fulfilled by the work. It's more infinite. It's more constant. And so, whereas happiness is, the things that lead up to it sounds more like an event. Fulfillment is a striving. It's a lifestyle. And you do all these things, like having a just cause, like building trusting teams, and working to be the leader you wish you had. In other words, you see your life as a life of service to those around you, whether you're in a company, whether you're an employee, whether you're a leader, or if you're just a parent, that you see your life in service, to your spouse, your partner, or your kids, and indeed your community. What makes a community highly functional is that we view that every single person within that community sees their responsibility to serve the community rather than standing around demanding the community does something for them.
Rule number 3, develop trust.
I think courage is external, right? The reason someone has courage to jump out of an airplane is because there's a parachute on their back. It's the external thing. A world-famous trapeze artist would never try a brand new death-defying act for the first time without a net. It's the net that gives them the courage. The Navy SEALs are considered one of the highest performing organizations on the planet. And a former SEAL was asked, what kind of person makes it into the SEALs? And he said, I can't tell you the kind of person that makes it in, but I can tell you the kind of person that doesn't make it in. He said the star college athletes who have never really been tested to the core of their being, none of them make it in. He said the preening leaders who like to delegate everything, none of them make it in. He says the guys who show up with hulking muscles covered in tattoos because they want to show you how tough they are, none of them make it in. He said some of the guys who make it in are skinny and scrawny. He said some of the guys who make it in, you see them shivering out of fear. He said, but every single one of the guys who makes it in, when they're emotionally exhausted, when they're physically exhausted, when they have absolutely nothing left to give, somehow, some way, they're able to dig down deep inside themselves to find the energy to help the guy next to them. In other words, the reason these organizations and these people have the courage to do remarkable things is not because of their internal strength. It's because they have the absolute confidence that there is someone to the left of them and someone to the right of them that cares about them. And they all know that. And it's the quality of the relationships that we maintain, professionally and personally, that give us the courage to do difficult things. Isaac Stern, the famous violinist, said, music is what happens between the notes. Well, something like trust happens between the meetings. Few people think about the importance of building trust when they go to work, or what do I need to do today to build trust with somebody? That doesn't really go through people's minds. But we have chit-chat as we walk into the meeting. We have chit-chat when we walk out of the meeting. And we see somebody in the hall and they're like, oh, meant to tell you something. Or you knock on someone's door and be like, got a minute? And all those little innocuous interactions over the course of time, like any relationship, build trust. It's about setting up the computer, setting up Zoom and having a work session with somebody. We're not working on the same thing, but I want to work with somebody, a work buddy, or having a lunch with somebody over Zoom, or a Monday morning huddle where we talk about what's on our heart and minds, but we do not talk business on purpose, or Friday cocktails that are just voluntary. But the most important one is to just pick up the phone and call people and say, how are you? That level of empathy. Just check in on someone. And I think we neglect it because we get mired in the day-to-day. But, if you're organized or disorganized, literally keep a list of your team on a little card next to your computer and just, go through it. And have I called this person in a while and talked to this person? I'm just going to call and check in. It doesn't matter if something's wrong or not wrong. Just check in on them. Don't wait for something to break. And let people know that that there's connection and there's a way to reach out and say, I need help. Because and the most important thing is for leaders to be honest and open about their need to ask for help. And that'll work.
Rule number 4, love your job.
They happen to have a coffee bar in the lobby of the Four Seasons in Vegas. And so one afternoon, I went and bought myself a cup of coffee. And the barista working that day was a kid named Noah. Noah was funny and charming and engaging, and I spent far too long buying a cup of coffee because I just so enjoyed talking to Noah. So as is my nature, I asked Noah, do you like your job? And without skipping a beat, Noah said, I love my job. Now, in my line of work, that's significant. Like is rational. I like the people, I like the work, I get paid well, I like my job. Love is emotional. It's a higher order connection. Right? Like, do you love your wife? I like her a lot, right? It's clearly a different standard, right? Yeah. So when Noah said, I love my job, my ears perked up. This kid has an emotional connection to his work. So immediately I followed up and said, tell me specifically what the Four Seasons is doing that you would say to me, you love your job. And again, without skipping a beat, Noah said, throughout the day, managers will walk past me and ask me how I'm doing, ask me if there's anything that I need to do my job better, not just my manager, any manager. And then he said, I also work at another hotel. And there the managers walk past us and catch us when we do something wrong. There the managers are always trying to drive performance and make sure we hit our numbers. He said, there I'd like to keep my head below the radar, get through the day and just collect my paycheck. Only at the Four Seasons do I feel I can be myself. Now, this is the exact same human being working at 2 different companies, and yet our experience of him will be profoundly different, not because of him, but because of the leadership environment in which he works. I get this question all the time. Simon, how do we get the most out of our people? People are not a towel that you wring them out to see how much you can get out of them. It's
That's a good one, man.
It's a flawed question. The question is, how do we create an environment in which our people can work at their natural best? And that is the art of leadership. It's creating an environment in which relationships can thrive, in which trust can thrive. And we all know what it feels like to be on a trusting team, right? It means that we feel psychologically safe enough to raise our hand and say, I made a mistake, or I need help, or I'm having trouble at home and it's affecting my work, or I'm scared, or I don't know what to do. Without any fear of humiliation or retribution, but rather to say these things with the absolute confidence that someone on our team will rush to support us. Unfortunately, we also all know what it feels like not to work on a trusting team, where admitting any of those things could hurt your chances of promotion, could hurt your chances of, you could be humiliated. And so when we work on teams where leadership is creating an environment where trust is at a premium, we force our people to come to work and lie, hide, and fake, where they're pretending that they've made no mistakes. They're lying, hiding, and faking, and eventually things will crack and things will eventually break. And when you talk about reinvention and you talk about innovation and you talk about challenging the status quo or whatever it is, necessarily there's risk, and necessarily there are mistakes, and necessarily there's stupid ideas. And you have to create an environment in which that's good. The alternative is everybody playing it safe, which is not the way that leads to vast or significant improvement.
Also, to make sure you're actually taking action after watching this video, I've designed a special free worksheet just for this video. The worksheet will highlight all of the lessons learned in this video, as well as pull out our 3 favorite learnings and quotes that will inspire you to actually do something. The worksheet will also give you space to write down what your key takeaways are and your specific plan of action to make sure you're getting results. If you want the worksheet designed specifically for this video, absolutely for free, there's a link in the description below. Go click on it and start building the momentum in your life and your business. I'll see you there. Rule number 5, help others grow.
There's no such thing as a perfect job, and there's no such thing as a perfect person. Of course there are things that we are doing that hold ourselves back, and of course there are things about the environment in which we work, whether it's the people or the job or whatever the circumstances, that may also be holding us back. I mean, but to see ourselves as victims is not the thing. But rather to seek opportunity, and it goes back to that growth mindset, which is what I've learned is one of the best ways to grow oneself is to actually help somebody on the team grow. Service. There's an entire section in the bookshop called self-help, and there's no section in the bookshop called help others. And I think what we've done is we've over-indexed on the whole rugged individualism sort of self-helpy thing. How can I be successful? How can I grow my business? How can I lose weight? How can I find love? And yet we forget, how can I help somebody else grow their business? How can I help somebody else find success? How can I help somebody else lose weight and find love, etc.? And the irony is the more that we set out to help somebody else because we have more objectivity with other people, ironically, we actually learn to help ourselves. I tried this out. I did a little experiment. A dear friend of mine was going through a hard time. A solopreneur. Work wasn't going well. Her marriage was shaky, and she was in a bad place. And so she knows what I do for a living, so she called me up and says, would you spend some time with me? I said, of course. So every single week, religiously, we spent about 90 minutes together. And she'd come over and we would talk. And I would offer her some perspective and some ideas, and she'd feel great for like a day or two, and then she'd go back. And then we'd get together the next week, and she'd feel great for a couple of days, and then go back. And this repeating pattern went on for quite a while. And then I remembered my own work, which is the idea of service. And had a little idea, which is to switch it around. And I called her up and said, look, I would like some coaching too. And it was genuine. I said, you know me better than anybody else. I trust you completely. When we get together for one of our sessions, can I use up some of the time? Can I tell you what I'm going through? And what ended up happening is we spent all 90 minutes talking about my stuff. And this went week after week after week, where she was just the advice giver. And strange things started to happen. She started to get more stability in her work, more stability in her marriage. Her confidence went up. And it was because she was helping me that she was gaining all the insights and perspective, because it wasn't personalized. It's like sales training, and anybody who's ever gone through sales training, you know this, which is you always do it with three people. You know, the person who plays the role of the salesperson, the person who plays the role of the person you're selling to, the buyer, and an observer. And it's the observer that does the learning, not the people playing the roles. Well, in this case, you got to see herself not be so close to it. It gave her objectivity. So I'm a great believer in, if you have a problem to solve at work, try and help somebody else solve that same problem.
Rule number 6, study your worthy rivals.
There's another guy who does what I do. He writes books, he gives talks, etc. His work is extremely well respected, and I admire his work as well. I happen to hate him. He's never done anything mean to me, and we've always had a very cordial relationship when we see each other professionally. I have an arbitrary hatred of him. And as a result of my hatred, I'm extremely competitive with him. I would log on to Amazon on a regular basis and check my book rankings, and then immediately check his. And keep in mind, I check no one else's, just the two of us. And if he was ahead, I was angry, and if I was ahead, I was smug. And whenever his name came up in polite conversation, I would seethe underneath. We were invited to speak together at a conference where we would be interviewed together. And I don't mean like literally, we would be on the stage together. And the interviewer thought it would be fun if we introduced each other. And so I went first. And I turned to him and I said, you make me really insecure. And I said, all of your strengths are all of my weaknesses. And whenever your name comes up, I get really uncomfortable. And he looked at me and he said, funny, I think the same thing about you. The reason I was so competitive with him had nothing to do with him, it had everything to do with me. Because his weaknesses revealed to me, because his strengths revealed to me my weaknesses, it's more difficult to take a hard look at myself and say, here's all the work you have to do. It's much easier, and dare I say more fun, to direct all my energies at beating him. That turned out to be an extremely cathartic experience. And I learned the value of a worthy rival. And the funny thing is, after that experience, I've never checked mine or his book ranking since. I applaud his work, celebrate him, want him to do well, because it turns out working together, we actually are stronger. And I think this is the same folly in business, right? Which is we decide who our competitors are, and then we obsess with beating them. Like ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox were obsessed with beating each other, and all they did was look at Nielsen ratings every morning. And then Netflix came up and didn't, who cares? They're all blew them out of the water, because they weren't even looking. They weren't even watching. Because that's the arbitrariness of, I remember back in the early days when I first started my career, I was in the ad business, and I was junior dog's buddy to the junior dog's buddy. And I was on the competitive analysis team. And basically what that meant was we studied the competition, and we put together decks to the executives of, look what the competition is doing. And we sometimes would hire outside consultants to run research for us. And if it was too expensive to study 7 of them, we'd cut it down to 4. Which is hilarious if you think about it. So you're making decisions based on 4 and ignore, anyway, you get my point. So I think the value of the other players in your industry, of the other players in the game, is not to beat them. Because there's no such thing. As I said before, Best Buy didn't win anything when Circuit City went bankrupt. But it's to recognize and respect them. There are some players who do some or many things better than you. Maybe they have a better leadership, stronger culture, better marketing. Maybe their products are better designed. Who knows what? And instead of trying to beat them, which could mean you choose underhanded things or just drop your price, You actually say, okay, let's make our product even better. They have revealed our weakness. Let's now work on that. Because the only competitor in an infinite game is yourself.
Rule number 7, create your world.
A just cause is something a lot more idealistic. It's a statement of the world that you wish, the way the world you wished it worked. It's the world that you imagine. Like, we imagine a world, as PwC, we imagine a world in which, and then we devote our practice, we devote our energy, we devote our resources to advance towards that cause, and we're going to bring our clients with us. The work that we do takes us closer to that cause. So I'll give you an example. So my just cause, our organization's just cause, we imagine a world, so you can see there's that forward thinking, which, as an aside, which is why we call it vision, is because you have to be able to see it, right? So we imagine a world in which the vast majority of people wake up every single morning inspired, feel safe wherever they are, and end the day fulfilled by the work that they do. That is our cause, and it is a cause so just that we would be willing to sacrifice in order to advance closer towards that ideal. We will never get there. It is an ideal.
Okay.
And you can look at organizations or leaders that have made profound impact in their industries or in the world. You'll see these just causes, whether it's all men are created equal, right? It's a just cause, imperfect in its own way, but you can see a nation striving. I have a dream, literally, imagining that one day little black children will hold hands on the playground with little white children, imperfect in its own, in reality, but you can see a nation striving. When Apple and Steve Jobs used to talk about empowering individuals to stand up to Big Brother, you can see the attraction to the personal computer because it literally gives power to an individual to compete against a corporation. Imperfect, but a striving. And all of these things become striving that become incredibly inspiring for a workforce because they feel like they're contributing to something bigger than themselves. But when you think about innovation, if you say, provide greater value for our clients, and it's not wrong, I have to stress, it's not wrong, but when you say innovate around that, the innovation tends to be more features and benefits. It tends to be tweaking and efficiencies. When you say be the best, I don't even know how you innovate around that, right? You can't say somebody, innovate so we're better. But when you say innovate a way to advance this, the ideas can come from anywhere inside the organization, and the ideas tend to be a lot bigger.
Okay.
So it's not that those things are wrong. It's that what I'm offering are a clearer path to embracing an infinite mindset.
Okay.
Right? It's not that the other doesn't work, it doesn't have value. It just has less value in the infinite game.
Rule number 8, ease your envy.
I was, during COVID, I worked out with a friend of mine who lives somewhere else. And we worked out on FaceTime together. We would just turn on FaceTime and just do the same workout together, basically. And one day we were doing a particularly difficult workout. And I said to her, I have some good news and I have some bad news. She says, well, what's the bad news? I said, the bad news is we're only halfway done. She says, well, what's the good news? I said, the good news is we're already halfway done. And the simple way in which I present the information literally profoundly changes the way in which we do the second half of the workout. We're only halfway done. The rest of the workout's a slog. It's difficult. It's hard. And we don't want to do it. We're already halfway done. I mean, it's all downhill. We've already done this once. We can easily finish this off. And it's amazing how easy it is to change our mindset. And so it's the same thing here. We've done it in our own organization where we see another organization who, I hate to use the word, I use it just for the example, but outpaces us. I mean, we don't care about that. But and instead of getting all angry and hot and bothered and trying to beat them, we say to them, worthy rival, what strength do they have that's revealing a weakness in us? And we're like, oh my goodness, our website sucks, or our e-commerce sucks, or our customer service sucks, or whatever it is. We spend a lot of time looking at people who we admire, who are in our space, who do some or many things better than us. We look at their websites, we look at their product, we look at their ease of use. We're like, wow, that's really good. We don't have to like it. We don't have to agree with it, but we can still compliment it. And I think that's the big thing. People think that, that you have to hate everything that somebody does. Nonsense. You don't have to agree or like, but you do have to respect. And quite frankly, to put on blinders and go through the world with blinders on that there's no one else out there and they definitely can't do anything better than you is
quite frankly, just stupid because it's just not true. You're not great at everything and you never will be. It's an infinite game. It's a game of constant improvement, just like every person. There's no such thing as a perfect person. We should be in a growth mindset, constantly trying to improve every day of our lives. It's the same thing. And even that's difficult. Even that you can't grow every day. Even that's hard. It's messy and human. And that's the fun. And that's why you go back to trusting teams and why the teamwork matters so much, because sometimes we can beat up ourselves or get stuck in a negative mindset. And all you need is one person to walk over and be like, hey, worthy rival, right? So the nice thing about worthy rivals is it's subjective. You can choose whichever person, whichever company you want. You don't want to have internal competition, but you can have internal rivals, where there are other people that you compare yourselves to and you try and get better. But you don't want to stab each other in the back. Get angry when somebody else gets a promotion. Like we've all had that. Deep down inside, we seethed when somebody gets a promotion when we didn't, right? Even if we weren't even up for it. That's a sign where necessary change needs to happen in our mindset. It's easier to do than you think. And when you get in the habit of it, it's absolutely wonderful.
Rule number 9, ask for help.
Tell someone, I need help. Like, I think it's one of these skills that is becoming fast lost, especially amongst a younger generation, which is the skill to ask for help. We're all trying to act so tough. This nation over-indexed on the whole rugged individualism thing, where we defined success as individual success. And most of our metrics, most of our incentives in almost every job are individual incentives. There's no team bonus. There's an individual bonus if you hit your numbers. And I think we've overdid it, quite frankly. And I think the pendulum needs to come back. And we have to remember that we're a team. We're members of teams. We're members of families. We're members of communities. We're members of societies. And this is where Maslow got it wrong. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. He says, fundamentally at the bottom of the pyramid is food and shelter. And he put third up the rung, he put relationships. Well, I've never heard of anyone dying by suicide because they were hungry. I've heard of people dying by suicide because they were lonely. So in other words, it can't be right. And at the top, you have self-actualization. I'm all self-actualized looking down at the rest of you who aren't at the top of the pyramid. What about shared actualization? And the mistake he made is that there's a paradox, which is every moment of every day, we are both individuals and members of groups. And every day we have to reconcile that. Do I put myself first at the expense of someone else, or do I prioritize someone else at the expense of myself? And the answer is, you're right and you're wrong. And there's a whole group of people that says, no, you always take care of yourself first, because if you're not healthy, you can't help others. And there's another group of people that says, no, you always help others first, because unless you help them, they won't be there for you. It's a paradox. It doesn't work. It's not so clean. And this is what we have to reconcile every day. And this is why finding balance and managing it and the stresses and strains, but the challenge of asking for help and relying on our community really, really matters. My definition of faith is that knowing you're on a team, even when you don't know who all the players are. We are surrounded by people who love us and will take care of us. You just have to ask sometimes, because sometimes they don't know that we need it.
And rule number 10, the last one before some very special bonus clips, is cope with uncertainty.
There are so many lessons that we've learned over the past year and a half to 2 years that I think prepare us to be ready for the next future. I got a kick out of, during the height of COVID, the number of pundits who said, during these unpredictable times, I would smile and say, all times are unpredictable. There's never been a time that was predictable, ever. All that happened was something that we didn't expect happened that reminded us that our lives and our work is unpredictable. And to future-proof ourselves means being ready for the unpredictable. There's something called an infinite mindset. And those with an infinite mindset embrace surprise. They find opportunity in the unexpected. That when something goes haywire, they go, ooh, what could we do with this? Versus a finite mindset, which likes to exert control and keep things very, very close and time frames short, because they fear the uncertain. They fear anything that's off the plan. And one of the things that we have to do to future-proof ourselves is to embrace things that are surprises and embrace the opportunity in uncertainty. The other thing that I think we have to learn on how to future-proof ourselves is how to deal with stress and how to deal with trauma. Whether somebody did well during COVID business-wise or whether they struggled business-wise, all of us suffered some sort of trauma. And when COVID first showed up, I called a friend of mine who's active duty military, and I asked him, when you're in combat, what do you do to compartmentalize your emotions so you can stay mission focused? My business blew up right in front of me, and I had to focus on my mission of rebuilding my business. I wanted to know how to control my emotions so I could get the work done that I had to get done. And he gave me a very sobering warning. He said, no one can compartmentalize their emotions. He says, we can do it for a short period of time, but everyone will suffer the trauma of combat, sometimes many months after we get home. And he said, you will go through it. Maybe not now, but you will go through it. And sure enough, about 4 or 5 months in, I started to feel extremely off my game. And I called him up and I said, can I just ask you, what are your symptoms when you go through the trauma of combat? I asked no leading questions. I simply said, what are your symptoms? He said, well, one, I fall out of my sleep pattern. For some reason, I go to bed late for no reason, and I don't want to get up in the morning. And I thought to myself, yup. And he said, I become unproductive, and I rationalize it. Like, oh, you've been working hard. It's okay if you have an unproductive day or two. But then I have another and another and another. And I thought to myself, yup. And he said, I also become extremely antisocial. I don't want to talk to anyone. I definitely don't want to ask for help. And I thought to myself, yup. And I realized I was going through depression. I was afraid to use that word for fear that it sounded like a diagnosis, but it was little d depression. That's exactly what I was going through, which is why things weren't working. And so I asked my friend again, so how do you overcome it? He said, one, you have to force yourself to get back into your sleep pattern. And two, you have to force yourself to ask people for help. And that's exactly what I was doing. And I reached out to friends that I trusted, friends that I loved, people who I knew were dispensers of good advice. And I called them one by one and said, I'm going through this. What can I do? I also reached out to friends who I knew were going through similar things and offered my support for them, because that's one of the things I've learned in my career, which is the best way to solve your problems is to help people who are going through the same thing. And so to understand how to react under extreme stress, to understand and build the relationship so that when you do go through something, you know who to call. My rule during COVID, and I called all my A-type personality friends and gave them my rule, which is there's no crying alone. And the question I would ask every one of you is, if you start to cry, who are you going to call? Who will you pick up the phone and just say, I need to cry, and tell them what's going on? It is much healthier to know that someone will give you a shoulder and be there to support you no matter what you're going through. I try and read news from both sides of the political aisle, not to find the one I agree with, but I want to understand how it's being reported. I want to know the different narratives that are being told so that I can understand those narratives, so that I can speak to those narratives, I can learn those narratives, and find hypocrisy in both sides, by the way. I think that the one mistake that we all fall into is to decide that the ones that I agree with are right and the ones that I disagree with are wrong. And this binary notion of right versus wrong is what's gotten us into this mess in the first place. Life is not so black and white in no respect. It's nuanced and gray and complicated and messy. And to understand that we are hypocrites in our own opinions, and so is the other side. And simply pointing out the hypocrisy of the other side is of no help whatsoever. What's more important is to point out our own hypocrisy. And to try and understand that. Like I said, it's a worthy rivalry thing, right? It's not trying to dominate or be right, but it's rather trying to improve and to grow. And so one of the things that I default to are values. I'm very proud of the fact that some of my friendships are with people who have very, very, very different political points of view, who we voted very, very differently in political elections, and we can go to blows talking about some of the things that the government is deciding whether we agree or disagree with it. But at the end of the day, their values are like mine. And we believe in taking care of each other, and we believe in looking out for each other. And at the end of the day, more than their politics, they are my friend. And I learned this lesson the hard way, where I was going for a walk with a friend who has very different political views than me. And she said something, and I definitely thought it, and I fear I may have said it. How can you be so stupid? And I realized I just called my friend stupid. And she completely got angry at me, not because I disagreed with her, it's because I judged her and insulted her. And you know what? She was 100% right. And what I had to learn in that moment was to listen, was to replace my judgment with curiosity, and to understand where her point of view comes from. And the more curious I became, to understand that there were actually things that we did agree upon. And though we may not have agreed upon everything, we actually could find common ground. And that common ground always boiled down to our values. And the more that I got good at listening to her, we became much more open to listening to me. And so as opposed to me hammering my opinion at her, we started to have conversations. And so I think when you go to a values level, politics becomes secondary. But when we let go of our values, then all we have is the politics, which is upsetting.
I had the opportunity to work with the Navy SEALs. And within the Navy SEALs, there's actually a more elite group within the SEALs. That's much harder to get into. You have to be a SEAL for like 5 years before you even can get into this even more elite group. And I asked the director of training for this group, how do you choose who gets into this more elite group within your own culture? And he drew an XY axis. He drew a graph for me. And on the vertical axis, he wrote performance. And on the horizontal axis, he wrote trust. The way they define performance is how good are you at your job, right? Your skill set. The way they define trust is what kind of person are you? And the way they put it is, I may trust you with my money. I may trust you with my life, but do I trust you with my money and my wife, right? So there's clearly nobody wants the low performer of low trust. Clearly everybody wants the high performer of high trust on their team. Clearly. What they learned is that a high performer of low trust is actually a toxic team member. And they would rather have a medium performer of high trust, sometimes a low performer of high trust, it's a relative scale, over the high performer of low trust. And this is one of the highest performing organizations on the planet. And they put huge credence in the trustworthiness and the character of the team member over their simple performance metrics. In business, we're the opposite. We have 1 million metrics to measure someone's performance, and we have negligible to no metrics to measure someone's trust. And so you may have a selfish-driven, toxic team member who, if they're high-performing, what do? We promote them. And sometimes you get to the point where leadership knows that this person is toxic, and you say, you probably should do something about this. You maybe want to remove them from the team. And they say the same thing. They're like, yeah, I know, but their performance is so good. You are literally just waiting for something to collapse, meaning either other people will leave, or the culture will start to crack, or there's a scandal, or that person will leave because they get a better job offer. They're not loyal, so they may be your highest performer, but they're not loyal. What the SEALs learn is sometimes these medium performers of high trust are your best natural leaders. The irony is, if you go to any team, it's actually really easy to find these toxic team members. That's the irony, even though we don't formally measure it. Go to any team and ask them who the asshole is, and they'll all point to the same person. Okay? And that's an opportunity to coach them. I don't believe in firing them. I believe in coaching them. We let people go when they're proved to be uncoachable. And by the way, if you go to that same team, you say, who do you trust more than anybody else? Who's got your back no matter what? Who's always there to help you? They'll probably also point to the same person who might be your best natural leader, and they may not be your best individual performer.
We don't teach difficult conversations. We don't teach conflict resolution. We don't teach de-escalation. And we don't teach how to give and receive feedback. We don't teach how to treat ideas. We don't even teach people how to have a meeting. We don't teach any of these things. And so we're just leaving it up to chance to hope that somebody knows what they're doing, which we would never let somebody on the front line do. We give them tons of training on how to do their jobs. So part of it is the skill set that we can train. The other thing is a lot of leaders, I think, are afraid of doing things for fear of saying the wrong thing. And again, this really lends itself to the training we need to give our leaders. And especially, I think this was really exaggerated after the murder of George Floyd, where so many leaders did nothing. They're not bad people,
they were just so afraid of saying the wrong thing or inflaming a situation or triggering someone that they chose to just do nothing. And so one of the things we need to do is teach people how to lean into tension, and to learn how to de-escalate one's own anger or one's own trigger. And again, you brought it up before, which is, and replace it with curiosity. Tell me more. What else? I'm struggling to understand. Let me tell you the story that's going through my head, I think is a really big one that I've learned, which is because I'm reacting based on my own narrative, right? And so they're reacting to my words or my reaction. And so one of the things that's really helped me is to share what's going on in my head so that people have the context of where my reaction's coming from. Let me tell you what my history is and what my background is. I'm not saying this is right or wrong, I'm just telling you my story. And I'll say, I had this happen in the past where X, Y, and Z. And so I'm nervous at your suggestion because in the past, this has happened. Can you help me resolve this, or do you understand where I'm coming from? And I think the more we can share what's going on in the process, rather than simply, responding with our answers or our reactions, helps the other person see the way we're trying to see it, and it also encourages us to see the way they're trying to see it. So I think the more we share, it's that vulnerability word again, right? Let me tell you my history, let me tell you my baggage, let me tell you my background, let me tell you my experiences, let me tell you where my opinion is coming from. The worst thing, the one that drives me up the wall, the one that triggers me is, this is how we've always done it. Well, why do we do it that way? Because this is how we've always done it. And my rule is, if you cannot tell me why we're doing it this way, that means it's on the chopping block. That doesn't mean it has to change, but I want real explanations of why we do something this way. If somebody can't tell me, then it's open to being changed.
I think one of the essential skills of being a good coach is listening. And this is a skill that is not taught in school. We don't learn it on home, unfortunately, and we don't learn it at work. Listening is not hearing the words that are spoken.
That's like my favorite quote that you say. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Listening is, I thought I was being original. The listening is not about hearing the words that are spoken. It's not being able to parrot back what somebody said to you. Listening is listening for meaning, right? You are a good listener. The test for being a good listener is if the other person feels heard, right?
Say that again.
Right?
Write that down.
So I mean, we've all had, we just take it out of the context of business, right? We've all had an argument or wanted to share our feelings with a friend or a loved one, right? Spouse, girlfriend, boyfriend. You're sitting on the couch and you say, something's bugging you, and you say, can I just tell you something that's bugging me? And they respond by trying to fix it. Or they respond by pointing out the facts that may or may not align with how you feel, right? Well, that's impossible because this is what happened. And what they're missing is you're not looking for them to compare the facts of what's being said. You just want to feel heard. You just want somebody to go, oh my God, that's really hard. Yeah, I hear it. I hear that. Thank you for sharing that with me. That must be difficult. Thank you, that's all I needed, right? I'll give you a very funny example of bad listening. So I used to date a girl who's an air traffic controller. Air traffic controllers are a breed unto themselves, and it's only about the facts. And I woke up one morning, I had something in my eye, and I couldn't open my eye, it was hurting. And I'm like flushing it out with water, and nothing's working. And I couldn't even open my eye, and I have her come, I'm like, come here. I'm like, look in my eye, do you see anything? Do you see anything? And she looks in, she goes like this, and she goes, there's nothing there, and then walks away. And I eventually, whatever it was, I eventually was okay. And I went up to her and was like, WTF, right? I'm like, I had something in my eye, you just walked away. And she's like, there was nothing there, so what do you want me to do? I was like, a little sympathy? She's like, well, that's not gonna get anything out of your eye. Listening is standing by my side while I'm flushing it out with water and go, oh my God, that must hurt so much. Yeah, it does, thank you, right? That's listening. And if somebody can learn to listen, and now this is where it gets actionable. This is not me just waxing philosophical and telling funny stories about listening. My friend Will Guidera, how many of you are restaurant people? Have you ever heard of 11 Madison Park? So at some point in New York City, 11 Madison Park was the best restaurant in the world, right? Ranked number one. And Will believes in this, he was the former owner, he believes in this concept of unreasonable hospitality, which is going to what good service is and then going way, way, way beyond. And one of the core tenets of unreasonable hospitality is learning to listen. And I'll give you an example that directly impacts your business. Most agents don't listen. And I'll give you an example. What do you do for your clients after they close on a home, right? It's very common. We've all bought a home too, right? Which is you walk into this new home that you just bought as a buyer, and there's a bottle of champagne in the fridge. There's a basket of flowers on the dining room table. The same basket of flowers that you gave to every other client, the same bottle of champagne that you gave to every client. Generic. I'm a number. It's just rote. But if you were listening, while they were looking at all those homes, and they saw this one little room that was too small to make a bedroom, it was just sort of a stupid little nook that nobody really understood why that room existed in the house, and your client walked in and goes, oh, I could make this my yoga room, and that's the house they bought. Instead of putting a bottle of champagne in the house, this is what Will talks about, instead of putting a bottle of champagne in the fridge, why not put a yoga mat in that room with a little note that says, it's perfect, right? That's called listening. And every single time you go out with clients, they are telling you things. They're telling you stories. They're waxing philosophical. They're telling you what they don't like and what they do like. But the problem is you're listening to whether they like big windows. You're listening to whether they like the view. You're listening to whether they have 2 cars and they need 3 cars or whatever it is. But you're not listening to the reasons why.
The why.
You're not listening for the meaning. And those are the little notes you want to make that make someone feel seen and make someone feel heard. When you're trying to build trusting teams, you recognize that you cannot enforce certainty on people. You can offer goals. People like goals. But what's important is how we get there, not just that we got there. Right. Think of it like trying to lose weight, right? There's nothing wrong with setting arbitrary goals with arbitrary dates, which is, by the way, how we build our businesses. Right. We want to hit X amount of dollars in revenue by probably the end of the year because that's when we pay taxes. It's a completely arbitrary number. Somebody might say, we could do better than that. And you're like, you're right. And then we change the number, right? Complete works of fiction. So we're striving to hit a work of fiction, right? Yep. And it's the same when we want to lose weight. I want to lose X amount of pounds by X date. Arbitrary, right? And we're doing all the things to do that. We're exercising, eating well, all the things. We love standing on the scale. We love a metric. There's nothing wrong with that. Human beings need that. We can't run in a marathon without mile markers. It's actually unnerving. We need to know how fast and how far. So the metrics are good. And let's say you hit your goal, right? You hit your performance goal just as you had articulated. Amazing. You feel incredible. You feel like you've succeeded. Here's the problem. You have to keep exercising for the rest of your life. Right? In other words, you don't stop doing the things that you were doing. So the game hasn't ended. It was simply a waypoint. But what I think is more interesting is what happens if you miss your goal? What happens if you don't lose the amount of weight that you wanted on that date? And the answer is nothing. Nothing happens because you're probably way healthier than you are now than you were. You're probably easily you can see the trend data. You can see you're well on your way to hitting your goal. You just picked the wrong date. You're easily going to hit it in another month if you just stick to your regime. Business is the same, which is sometimes we miss our goals, but the question is what's the trend data? Is the team working well together? Is morale high? Is some of it out of our control? Market conditions and things like that, things we didn't know about. And so if we happen to miss the number, the problem is how are we rewarding our people? And so many of us only reward our people based on if they hit the number. But what if they're begging, borrowing, and stealing? What if they simply rush at the end of the quarter to drop their prices or have some sort of promotion or have some trickery? They'll hit the number. And then we bonus them, which tells everybody else, I don't care how you hit your numbers as long as you hit them. Well, guess what kind of behavior that's going to reinforce inside our organization? Whereas if you look at the data, the trend data, and you reward somebody who's well on the path, what we're telling you is as long as you're doing a good job, you'll do well in this organization. Leaders understand that they are not responsible for the results. They are responsible for the people who are responsible for the results. And that skill set is very, very different than just trying to get people to do the thing that you know how to do better than them because you've been doing it your whole life. I get asked very often, what are the most important characteristics of leadership? Vision, charisma, I know plenty of incredible leaders that aren't big Steve Jobs visionaries, they're just not. And I know some fantastic leaders who do not have charisma. They're quiet and super introverted, and they're just not that exciting to talk to or spend time with. When I say charisma, I mean the traditional definition of it, which is more about energy. I believe charisma is undying belief in something, and that they have in spades. But I think courage is the one thing that all great leaders have to have, because we are surrounded by overwhelming forces every day of our lives pushing us to play the finite game. If you're a public company, the markets, all they want for their own selfish gain is for you to make short-term decisions. The pressures are overwhelming. If you're a numbers-driven person, the pressures are overwhelming. If you're in survival mode, the pressures are overwhelming. If you have a spouse who spends more money than you can make, the pressures are overwhelming. All the pressures around us, even the way we treat competition versus rivalry, like we feel like we have to win all the time. The pressures every day on us are absolutely overwhelming for us to be finite and to prioritize the short term over the long term, to prioritize the urgent over the important. And it takes unbelievable courage to put the important before the urgent. It takes unbelievable courage to resist all the pressures coming from selfish outside parties. It takes unbelievable pressure to do the right thing.
When the pandemic struck, I mean, my book came out a few months before the pandemic. And so for someone like me who loves to observe and whether this stuff is true or not, you sort of go, you sort of wonder, is everything going to hold up or not? And as an existential flex is something that I predicted would happen either zero, once, or at the absolute most twice in a career. But when COVID happened, we all went through it at the same time. Existential flexibility is that you're able to make a profound 180-degree strategic shift in order to continue to advance your cause. In other words, stay relevant. This is not about the daily flexibility of business. We're talking profound strategic shift here. And sometimes brought on by pandemic, sometimes brought on by changing technology or politics or culture or tastes, but you're able to adjust. So for example, it's Apple, Steve Jobs, when they're developing technology in one direction, they discover this thing called the graphic user interface that they did not invent, and they decide to walk away from millions of dollars spent and countless man hours in order to focus on a different strategic position, because Jobs believed that was a better way to advance his cause of empowering individuals to use personal computers. That's existential flex. Find a friend you love, and one of those people who, if you called them at 3:00 in the morning, they'd take your call and you would take theirs. Don't do this with a spouse. Don't do this with a sibling. Don't do this with a boyfriend or girlfriend. Those relationships are too close. But find a best friend and ask them this simple question: why are we friends? And they're going to look at you like you're crazy, because it's very hard for the human brain to put our feelings into words, because the part of the brain that controls our feelings doesn't control language. This is why we use metaphors and analogies, and why we struggle to tell people how we actually feel. It's because it's a different part of the brain. And so they're going to look at you and be like, I don't know. Why are you asking me this? And you say, come on, I know you've been there for me my whole life. And then you actually stop asking the question why, ironically. You actually ask the question what. You say, come on, what specifically is it about me that I know you'd be there for me no matter what? And they're going to hem and haw because it's hard to put into words. Don't help them. Don't let anybody else help them. And they're going to start describing you. I don't know. You're funny. You're smart. You're honest. You've always been there for me. You go, good. You play devil's advocate. Good. That's the definition of a friend. What specifically is about me that I'd know you'd be there for me no matter what? And again, they'll hem and haw, and some will get through this quickly, and some will get through it slowly, and it'll be a struggle, and you have to continue to play devil's advocate. Good, that's the definition of a close friend. What specifically is it about me? And eventually, they'll give up. Eventually, they'll stop describing you, and they'll start describing themselves. Like my friend said to me, Simon, I don't know. All I know is that I can sit in a room with you. I don't even have to talk to you, and I feel inspired, and I got goosebumps. In fact, I'm getting them right now. they will put into words the value you have in their life, and you will have the emotional reaction. You'll either well up with tears or you will get goosebumps. This puts you in the ballpark. This is where your why lives. And if you do this with multiple friends, they will say the same kind of thing. In fact, sometimes they'll say the same exact thing, because your why is the thing you give to the world, and amongst your closest and best friends, it is the space you fill in their lives. So that's a fun little way you can find your why.
First and foremost, we have to understand that there's no such thing as certainty of outcome. And this is why, this is a huge difference between finite mindsets and infinite mindsets, right? A finite-minded leader is afraid of surprises and does not like uncertainty, which is why they like to work in very short time frames, because you can actually affect quite a lot of certainty if you only think quarter to quarter, maybe year to year. But if you start thinking in 5 and 10 year increments, we all know we have zero control over those outcomes. So finite-minded players like to play with very short time frames because it makes them feel better, even though the game is infinite. So it's actually, again, sort of a stupid idea. Infinite-minded players embrace uncertainty and find opportunity in surprise. And so where something goes wrong or different, and just as an aside, I got such a kick out of when COVID struck, everybody was talking about during these uncertain times. Newsflash, all times are uncertain. There's never been a time in history ever that was certain. All that happened was something that we didn't expect took place that reminded us that time is uncertain. And for the finite-minded players, the immediate reaction was panic, right? What am I going to do? How am I going to survive? And try double down on the old way of doing things, hoping that if I just did it more, or at least attempt to do it online, that it would survive, right? The more infinite-minded players, and this has nothing to do with stress, we can still have high stress with what was going on, but the more infinite-minded players saw the sudden change in their business and thought, ooh, okay, this is an opportunity. What can I do with this? And instead of doubling down on the way they used to do things, but doing it online, they said, okay, the times have changed, the way I operate my business have changed, all the things that I used to be able to do, like having lunch with people, can't do anymore. So given what I know now, if I was starting from scratch, I have something really valuable and important, how would I build my business today to still provide the value to the people who are looking for the thing that I offer? And that was their mentality. Their mentality was very entrepreneurial. Their mentality was very creative. And though it may have caused stress, there was an appreciation for the opportunity.
We come to work feeling uncomfortable that some of the decisions that are being made don't benefit the good of the employee, that it really benefits this artificial constituency that we call the shareholder, which is really just a bunch of institutional investors. There's this shareholder myth because there's been a steady decline of the middle class being involved in the stock market for years. And the whole point of the stock market was that we all get to share in the wealth that we helped build, because it's on the back of average Joe employees that produced the great wealth in the nation. And the whole point of the stock market, the genius of the modern day corporation, the genius of the public company, was that we all get to share in the wealth that we're helping produce. Unfortunately, over the course of the 80s and 90s, we've seen systems produced where we're seeing the general population, the middle class, actually be less included in that success. And the reason I wrote The Infinite Game was because I myself got tired of being told by people in positions of authority or people of extreme wealth that I was naive, that I don't understand how business works. And for many years, I believed them. I thought, maybe I am the dumb one, right? We all kind of feel that, because they have the power, they have the authority, they have the money, they know more than we do, but we still go to work and feel uncomfortable. And it turns out that discomfort, that gut feeling that says that there's something wrong here, turns out that the majority actually knows something. And to me, this is a world is flat moment, that the people who've learned to game the system, that this discomfort that we feel, we actually are right. Like, they actually don't understand the game they're in. Business is an infinite game, and when you play with a finite mindset, lots of people suffer, including the companies that they themselves are trying to build. That's the great irony. The great irony is the way you build great companies is with an infinite mindset. The way you build great companies is by prioritizing people before profit. The way you build great companies is will before resources. Both things important, but there has to be this general leaning. where we can feel, when we come to work and feel like we're part of something bigger than ourselves, where we feel that our work and our effort is worth more than simply the money we make.
How can we ensure that we're changing with times, technology, culture, politics, and tastes, rather than just trying to beat our competitor? And you see it across industries. Publishing, for example. The internet showed up and they saw it and they thought it was nice. And they, as it took on, they sort of, I guess they were interested in it. They sort of played defense. And then Amazon showed up and Amazon went to all of them and said, hey, you want to invest in us? And they all said no. Well, now they're all playing catch up. They're all playing defense. Netflix went to Blockbuster and said, want to buy us? And Blockbuster said no. The rest of the TV and movie industry were too busy comparing who had higher ratings, and they completely missed the fact that Netflix has now completely reinvented television. I find that fascinating. General Motors was destroying its own electric vehicles to protect its old business, and now they're all rushing to catch up with Tesla. I think this is hilarious. And it's the little companies, the Netflixes, the Amazons, the Teslas, that get ignored, that aren't seen as a threat, that end up defining and redefining entire marketplaces. Now, this is not unique to small companies. Big companies can absolutely redefine. The problem is big companies are more obsessed with their finite goals. Big companies are more obsessed with beating their competitors. And little companies are obsessed with their vision. Little companies are obsessed with this outsized vision that outstrips the resources they have, right? Somebody says, we're going to do this, and everybody looks around and goes, well, we don't have the money for that. We don't have the talent for that. I guess we'll have to be creative. And I think this is one of the opportunities for big companies. As they get big, their visions get smaller. They become goals that they can just do a back plan for. There's nothing inherent that a big company shouldn't be innovative. But to your point before, they become risk averse. They become stable. And at the end of the day, it takes huge vision. What I imagine is a huge corporation, a multi-billion-dollar corporation, that someone will say, we imagine a world that's so crazy and so idealistic that in this large corporation, they all look around and go, we don't have the money for that. We don't have the talent for that. I guess we'll have to be creative, which scares the heck out of the investor community. But remember, all of those companies were founded by, whether it's your Steve Jobs or all of these companies, Salesforce, they all started by young people who had no experience and only had vision. And I think there's no reason why big companies cannot be innovative, but I think it's about pushing their own boundaries and allowing for entrepreneurship. And inherent in entrepreneurship is failure. You can't experiment without failing. I remember talking to a CFO of a big company once, and he told me that he has two priorities for the company. Innovation and efficiency. I said, good luck with that. There's nothing efficient about innovation because you have to keep trying something over and over again. There's nothing efficient about that. And for some reason, I don't know what it is, companies are obsessed with growth. And everybody, they brag, we're a hyper growth company. Show me one article, not 10, not 15, show me one article that shows any data that hyper growth is good for business and good for the company. There is no data to show that companies who are obsessed with growth actually build stronger companies, because they don't. And so it is a fool's errand that is promoted usually by an incentive structure that rewards short-term benefits. I think what companies can do is start to look at their incentive structures and start rewarding things like teamwork, ethics, and long-term gain. And guess what? You'll get the behavior you reward.
There's a whole industry around, I think, work-life balance. Is that what it was? Yeah. It's like there's a massive industry that's just trying to teach this and help people with work-life balance.
Yeah, the problem
but it seems like it's failing. Right?
It's treating a symptom, isn't it? It's like so many things in our life. So here's the bad analogy. So we buy running sneakers, and they have really thick. You know this. Yeah. They have really thick heels, tons of padding in the heel, right? But that's because people don't know how to run, right? Because we land with our heel, which is bad for our joints. You're not supposed to have an extended knee. Yeah, all of it. You're supposed to be a toe planter, where your knees are always bent. I mean, you know all this. Yeah. So instead of teaching people how to run, what we do is we just build shoes with more padding in the heel and treat the symptom rather than the cause, right? And I think it's
it's the same thing. You know, we treat symptoms instead of the cause.
So
the work-life balance thing, what we're doing is instead of changing businesses, instead of changing the way a business operates and changing the way in which we teach leaders to operate with an infinite mindset, so that we more naturally have work-life balance. And let's be crystal clear what work-life balance means. You know, doing more yoga does not create work-life balance. Right?
That's the shoe. The cushion on the shoe.
That's the cushion on the shoe, right?
Yeah.
The imbalance is I feel safe at home, I don't feel safe at work. That's the imbalance.
Wow.
And no amount of yoga or vacation time is gonna fix that. What fixes that work-life imbalance is better quality leadership in our businesses. And then what you'll find is the balance. But instead what we do is we have an entire industry that's treating the symptom, that's putting cushion on the shoe to make us feel kinda for an hour that I've achieved balance. You know? But it's just for an hour. And you know, we literally market, you know, companies market themselves as helping provide you work-life balance. Unless you're teaching leaders to the people who are my bosses, then you are not helping me achieve work-life balance. You're helping me numb the pain. You're helping me cushion the blow.
We're social animals. Our happiness, our joy, our success, everything is dependent on our relationships. And we respond to the environments we're in. You can take a good person and put them in a bad environment, and they're capable of doing bad things. Likewise, you can take a person that the group or even society has given up on, and you put them in a good environment, and they're capable of turning their lives around and really making something remarkable out of themselves. We are social animals, and we respond to the environments we're in, and leaders are responsible for building that environment. And if you create an environment in which people feel safe amongst their own, we will naturally, the natural human response to those conditions is trust and cooperation. Remember, trust and cooperation are feelings, they're not instructions. There's no PowerPoint or pitch that you can give upon the end that someone will trust you. You can't tell somebody, trust me. It doesn't work that way. They're feelings. Likewise, if you create an environment where we actually fear each other, fear the people with whom we work, the natural human reaction to that environment is paranoia, cynicism, mistrust, and self-interest. That's what happens. There's enough danger outside the organization. There's enough stuff going on outside that we should have to fear the people we work with or fear our own leaders. And most leaders don't get this. Most leaders think leadership is about being in charge. No, it's not. It's about taking care of those in your charge. Most leaders think everybody works for them. No, you work for the people in your organization. It is your responsibility to take care of them, make them feel safe, and they will naturally want to cooperate and work hard and give you their blood and sweat and tears to advance your vision. All they ask is you take care of them, make them feel valued and valuable, and the rest takes care of itself. It's like a parent, it's like a coach. Teach them, train them, give them the opportunity to fall and try again. And if they fear the leader, then they're going to take steps to protect themselves from the leader. It's pervasive in our world today. If you work in an organization where it's standard practice for employees to feel the need to send a CYA email after every single decision they make, that is a sign that they are taking time and energy out of their day away from doing their job in order to protect themselves from their own leaders. That's what that is. You know, anybody who keeps a file of all the good things they've done in their career just in case they need it, that is people taking time and energy away from doing their jobs in order to protect themselves from their own organization. So you can't ask those people to give you the best of their thinking and be more productive if you've created an environment where they're forced to protect themselves from you, you know? And this is what I learned. And so it's all about this environment, this circle of safety.
There are 5 practices in order to lead with an infinite mindset. You have to have a just cause. You have to have trusting teams. You have to have a worthy rival. You have to have a capacity for existential flexibility, and you have to have the courage to lead. So, just cause. We have to give our people something to advance. A cause so just that they would be willing to sacrifice their interests in order to do so. In other words, turn down a better paying job, or frequent business trips, or working late hours. And though I may not like those things, I do them because it feels worth it, because I believe in what I'm a part of here, because I feel that I'm helping advance, because there's no achieving in the infinite game. The goal is not final achievement, the goal is advancing. to progress in the infinite game, and to have that vision of an idealized state of the world that all men are created equal, right? It's an ideal that a nation is striving towards, that will never actually get there, but will die trying. That's the point. And we can offer people the same thing inside an organization. In fact, we have to give them something to advance. Now, how is this different from the why? A why comes from the past. It is an origin story. Every single one of us has our own unique why. It is our birthright. It comes from the sum total of how we were raised as kids. It is objective. You have one, and you have one for the rest of your life. The only one, right? And the rest of our lives are about making the decisions that help us keep in balance with our why. A just cause doesn't come from the past. A just cause is about the future. It's about where we're going, right? You can have multiple just causes. You can have one professionally, you can have one personally, you can have one for your family, you can have one for your church. And we're involved in all of these. There's massive pressure put on people, especially young people, to what's your vision? Well, we're not all Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. We're not all visionaries. We don't have to have a vision, but we do have to find a vision, that we can find someone else's vision, and we are so compelled by it that we want to make it our own. That's what it means to go work for a company with a visionary leader, that we believe in that vision so clearly that we take their vision and we make it our own. And we will happily contribute our work, our effort, in order to advance what is now my vision. Right? Martin Luther King had a vision. He stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and told us his vision, but his vision became our vision. So I may not have come up with that vision, but I found it, and I'd like to devote time and energy to help advance it, even beyond him.
We all carry a narrative. Someone's lazy. Someone's stupid. Someone doesn't care. Someone's only in it for themselves. These are narratives that we carry. And the problem is when we evaluate their behavior through our narrative, it'll become self-reinforcing. We will see the things that reinforce our narrative. And the problem is then we'll treat them that way. If we've decided someone's lazy, we're going to treat them as lazy. So there's a great exercise to do, which is literally take out a piece of paper, and when we're struggling with someone, to think, what are the 20 other things that could be going on in their life? So yeah, number one, they're lazy. Possible. It's absolutely possible. Number two, they're having trouble in their marriage. Number three, their things have gone wrong and they don't know how to ask for help. Number four, they're still struggling with the trauma of COVID. Number five, their kids are flunking out of school. Like all of a sudden, we realize there's a lot of other reasons that could explain their behavior, and we will then treat them accordingly. We will treat them with greater empathy. Instead of walking into someone's classroom and saying, what the hell, your performance is still down. I've had this conversation with you before. You got to get your performance up, or I don't know what's going to happen. Or you can walk into their classroom and say, your performance is down. We've had this conversation before. Are you okay? I'm worried about you. Mm-hmm. They have a problem, but they aren't necessarily the problem. And even if ultimately it does become that they're a bad fit for the culture, they are still not the problem. They still are just a bad fit for the culture. They have a problem. We can help them solve that problem by going to help them relocate to a different school district where they're going to be so much happier. We're going to be so much happier. Everybody gets to be so much happier. So the other story I was thinking of is the story of Alan Mulally. When he took over Ford, Ford was losing money hand over fist. In other words, performance was in decline. And when he sat down with his most senior executives and he asked for a report on how their divisions were going, regular green, every single one of them delivered PowerPoints with all green slides. And he said at the end of the meeting, how can everything be green if we're losing billions of dollars? And they just sat there. And he had another meeting. Same thing, all green. And he said the same thing. How can everything be green if we're losing billions of dollars? The problem was the previous leader, if you delivered a red slide, you got fired. And so there was no way that anybody was going to tell the truth because their job depended on it. And so one executive took the risk to turn one slide red. And Mulally said, thank you for the visibility. That's great transparency. Now, how can we all help him fix that problem? He has a problem. He is not the problem. All the other executives thought he was going to get fired. Turns out he wasn't. And slowly but surely, everybody, including leadership, could finally get a clear and transparent view of what was actually going on in their organization. And they worked together to solve the problems. If somebody was struggling,
People said, how can we help you, rather than I'm fine, you're the one that's screwing everything up. So it's a great way to think about it.
We are designed to take care of each other. As social animals, it is in our biology that we will take care of each other. This is why it feels so good when somebody does something really nice for us with no expectation of anything in return. We've all had the experience where somebody does something nice and you're like, oh my God, thank you. And then they put their hand out, you're like, oh, it kind of like ruins the whole experience,
Completely,
right?
absolutely.
It ruins it. But when they just do it and they're like, no. And you're like, please. And they're like, no, it's my pleasure.
Yes.
You know, not only does our esteem for them go up, but it feels good. Yeah. Likewise, it feels good when we do something for someone else with no expectation of anything in return. When we give our time and our energy. Money actually doesn't work, believe it or not. Like if I told you I gave $500 to charity this morning, you'd be like, okay.
That's great, Simon.
But if I told you that last weekend I gave up my Saturday and went to painted schools in the inner city, you'd be like, nice, that's really awesome. Yes. Right? Now the value of my labor was worth a lot less than $500. And that's the point, right? That's the point, which is we are designed to take care of each other. And there's a chemical called oxytocin, which is the chemical responsible for our feelings of love and friendship and trust. When you look at somebody you adore and you go like this, that's oxytocin. When somebody touches you and says, oh my God, it's so good to see you. Touch creates oxytocin. Yeah. So good to see you.
Yes.
You know, it actually makes us feel closer to each other.
Yes.
You know, when oxytocin is released in our bodies, not only does it make us feel good, not only does it boost our immune systems, but the more oxytocin we have in our bodies, it actually makes us more generous because the human body is trying to get us to look after each other. And it gets even better than that. The person who does the act of generosity, giving of time or energy without expectation of anything in return, they get a shot of oxytocin. The person on the receiving end gets a shot of oxytocin. And even witnessing an act of generosity or kindness releases oxytocin. It feels good to see somebody do something nice. And the more oxytocin we have in our bodies, as I said, means we're more likely to do something nice for somebody. This is the biology of pay it forwards. It's the human body's desperate attempt to get us to look after each other. And so when we create environments where we allow that to flow, it does naturally. It just takes care of itself. It's just biology. When we create environments where we restrict that, it actually does the opposite. It releases a chemical called cortisol, which is the feeling of stress and anxiety. Cortisol actually inhibits oxytocin, which means if we work in a poorly led organization, not only do we have high stress, but it actually inhibits empathy. In other words, I'm less likely to even want to care about somebody because of the poor leadership and the poor environment that's been provided for me to work in. Right? And the more cortisol we have in our bodies, stress goes up, anxiety goes up, it affects our immune systems. Happy people live longer. Happy people have lower rates of cancer, diabetes, and heart disease. Which means when you're in a position of leadership, you're actually medically responsible for the lives of these people. Get the environment right, they will live longer, they will suffer lower cases of disease, and they will probably have happier families because of it. Whereas if you're a bad leader, over the course of time, you're actually killing the people working with you. Our jobs are actually killing us.
Because you made it this far in a video, I want to celebrate you. Most people start and don't finish. Most people never actually follow through. Most people say they want something, but they don't ever do the work to actually get it. But you are different. You are special. Believe Nation, you made it here all the way to the end, and I love you. So as a special celebration, if you put a hashtag believe down in the comments below on this video, I will showcase you and celebrate you somewhere on the screen in a future video because you are awesome. For 10 more amazing rules from Brendon Burchard, check the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
We set expectations on ourselves of what we see of others. A lot of our behaviors, our habits, our mental models are really a fact of sociology. And when you understand that the people you surround yourself with, you talk with, you look at, you work out with,